So good afternoon, everyone. We'll kick off our final seminar in preparation for this year's National Heritage Week. We have seen the Heritage Week idea grow and prosper, and now, of course, it has a whole new life online, which adds a whole new dimension to how we interact and learn about our heritage, both locally and nationally. We've had some very useful tips and some great passion from the speakers at previous seminars. And so it's fitting, I think, to end with the part where you are reminded about the importance of sharing the stories that you have, of, if you like, not keeping them to yourself, which is quite tempting sometimes, but letting other people know what you're about and what you're doing so that you have greater reach. So that Heritage Week is not just about including groups who already have the capacity, maybe in the interest to do something for Heritage Week, but that if you are part of a group or helping a group in any way, that you then encourage others to join and listen and get involved in whatever you're doing. And of course, we all know that the way to do that is via publicity, both social media and traditional local press, national press, local radio, national radio. And the great thing is that in Ireland particularly, we all love a good story. We love to hear about people. We love to hear about the past. We're particularly interested in the quirky and the original. And so there's plenty of food for thought. And as Heritage Week grows and becomes more inclusive, I think we're going to see even more of those great stories emerging, literally in some cases from envelopes in the backs of wardrobes or under beds, or indeed from the fields and from the ancient buildings that surround us, as people start digging around and asking more questions and connecting with each other. Now, already National Heritage Week is supported by Fáilte Ireland and the Irish Times and RTE and the Department of Heritage and the OPW and the Landmark Trust, all great organisations to have on your side, and they of course will do their share of supporting and promoting what you do. But nothing beats telling your story to your local community and to the people you might meet on the street or in the shops or at work. And so if we can offer advice today for this area of publicising your work, publicising what you're doing, and gathering up more people to become involved, either as spectators, or you never know, they'll become the organisers for next year. So we are back talking with Thelma Harris, who, as you know, is part of the team organising Heritage Week, and she is going to give us some more tips on the social media and online aspect of how you can improve and enhance the work that you're doing for Heritage Week. Thelma.
Thanks, Susan. And I'm just going to set up my screen here, so just bear with me. Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. As Susan said, I'm Thelma and I'm coming from THR Communications, and we're working with the Heritage Council to deliver National Heritage Week 2021. For this, our third and final webinar, we wanted to take a quick look at some of the areas you might be considering when looking to communicate your heritage project for National Heritage Week. And so what do I mean by that? Well, this session is all about sharing the research or work that you have done with a new audience, a wider audience, or this may be the first time that you're sharing your work with the public. This afternoon session is designed as much for those who are beginning their heritage journey as it is for seasoned National Heritage Week organisers. And as Susan mentioned, I'm going to look mostly at the online or the social media aspect of communication, and then Mark from the Heritage Council will come in and look at the more media focused approach. So my focus today is going to be on using social media to amplify your message, and we'll be looking at using the right platform for the right audience. And also the importance of video there. And then we'll take a quick look at creating blogs and where you might go about sharing those, promoting events and sharing newsletters. And this is really designed to be a very top level introduction. And I'm hoping then that if you have specific questions, you'll share those with us, and you can use the chat or the Q&A function on the Zoom webinar to share those with us. We'll be monitoring those throughout. So depending on the type of project you're working on, you might be thinking about using social media to present your heritage project and share it with your audience. Facebook is the most widely used and user-friendly platform out there for social media. And we would recommend that you would consider it if you're looking at building an online community and engaging local people. So yeah, it's the most popular social media platform, and it would work well if your heritage project is something like a photo exhibition or is accompanied by photographs, or if you plan on sharing videos with your audiences. It also allows you to tell stories and accompany your visual content with descriptions, which you wouldn't have the benefit of on some of the other platforms. To help to engage your audience, it is also worth thinking about how to give your followers a reason to comment or to post questions on your content. So really think about that interaction between you and your audience when you're using all social media, but especially Facebook. And then you also have the Facebook Live feature if you're looking at doing a live event or an online event, so you can broadcast that on Facebook, which is an added advantage. And if your project includes a small socially distanced gathering or heritage walk, you can promote that on Facebook by creating a Facebook event connected to your main project page. For most heritage projects, the best way to use Facebook to capture your project is to create a Facebook page for your heritage project. So if you're already on Facebook, it would be easy then to set up a specific page for your project. So yeah, if you're looking at Facebook, that's what we would recommend. And again, just feel free to ask questions and we can come back to those afterwards. And then Instagram. So if you're specifically trying to engage with a younger audience, it might be worth considering Instagram. This is the fastest growing platform, social media platform, and the majority of users are under 30. So it's a slightly younger demographic than you'd find on Facebook. So definitely worth considering for that younger audience. And Instagram is all about images. If your project is made up of photographs, images, or graphics, it's worth considering Instagram. Like Facebook, you can share images, videos, and text to your followers, and the layout is very easy to use. For Instagram, it might be worth considering a strategic approach to how and when you share content. Depending on your project, it might work well to gradually share images so that you're kind of peppering the project throughout Heritage Week. And so it would be if you had images in your project, or if your project was an exhibition, it would be a really nice platform to use for that, but taking into consideration the audience that's on that platform as well. And then just a word of warning when using Instagram, your content will need to be powerful and compelling to ensure audience engagement, because it's such a fast moving platform. It's very easy for things that aren't eye-catching to be overlooked. And then on Twitter, so we actually had a webinar just before this one at 1 o'clock, and we had a great chat about Twitter, but we'll go through this again, and you can watch back our discussion on Twitter from the previous webinar on YouTube later this week when we upload all the videos from our webinar series. When it comes to sharing content, Twitter is really unlike Facebook or Instagram. The value of Twitter is its brevity. So your tweet is capped at a max of 280 characters. So it's really brief, 1 or 2 lines. If you're considering using Twitter, think about your audience, think about the audience you want to engage with and the type of content you want to share. Because of its brevity and fast pace, Twitter may not be suitable to host your project on, but would be very workable if you were looking for a platform to bring people to your maybe your website or your YouTube channel. So it's really about amplifying the message behind your project. And if you're new to Twitter, you'll need to build your followers for greater impact. And I just have mapped out kind of 5 things that you'll need to do there. So you can identify key influencers in your project topic area. So you might follow some heritage experts or other project organisers. We had Shirley on in the webinar earlier from Monaghan. She's the Heritage Officer in Monaghan. She'd be a really good person to follow because she herself has built up a really nice following in that heritage space on Twitter. And there'll be other heritage officers throughout the country. There'll be other heritage experts that, you know, it might be worth engaging with them or following them so that you can see who's, you know, what audiences are out there. Follow your target audience. So, you know, are there local people that you should be following to get their attention and bring them into your project? Retweeting relevant users' content, that will give you a reputation of being really knowledgeable in the space. And then sharing your own content. And as I said, linking that back then to wherever you're housing your full project. And then using hashtags to create a following. So there'll be specific hashtags that people in your area, either locally or in your heritage area, so the topic that you're exploring, might be following. And just, I think Twitter, it's important to take that step back and just listen to what's going on before you engage, because it'll give you a really good foundation on how best to use the platform. And since I've mentioned hashtags there, we might just have a quick look at those. So hashtags are used on social media to identify messages on specific topics, and they're searchable. So they act like a compass to help you navigate through all the noise on social media and find that content that you're looking for. So it's worth thinking about your audience and others' interests in your topic when you're looking at hashtags. So, you know, what are your audience already following, or what hashtag would resonate with them? And then have a think about, well, do you need to create a new hashtag, or can you use one that's already out there? So if you were creating a new one, it might be the name of your project. And if you were going to just use an existing one, the example I have there is hashtag genealogy. So people in that area would pick up on your project if that's if it's a genealogy project. So, and you could use both, so you can use multiple hashtags. Whatever your strategy, make sure you add your hashtags to each piece that you post on social media to ensure maximum exposure. If you're planning on using a unique hashtag, and this is important, always check that the hashtag hasn't been used on a previous campaign. And if it has, but maybe it's an older campaign that it's no longer relevant to, just make sure that it's a suitable campaign, because it will eventually, it'll appear alongside your own content when people are using the hashtag. And then the last thing, just on social media, and I know that we're racing through it, but just make sure that you're tagging the relevant partners or relevant organizations to your project. And again, that'll just build up support. So one thing that came up in our earlier session was local media, and I'm sure Mark will look at this later, but if it's a local story, a local heritage story, feel free to tag your local paper or your local radio station in that post on any of your platforms. This isn't just Twitter specific, because it'll just raise that to them and you wouldn't know what would come from that. So that's our look at social media. And then the other aspects I wanted to look at were just some ideas if you were planning your project and how you were going to share or communicate them. So I just did this little table to give you an idea of what platforms are out there. So for blogs, the platform that and again, there's so many out there, but these are just to give you an idea of where you might start. And the platform for blogs that I've picked out is Medium. And I suppose it's like a social network or a social media network, but the content are blog posts. So the advantage of that then is that you're joining a global conversation. And so your blog is on this platform, a global platform, and again, with the hashtags or topics, as they call them on Medium, it could be a genealogy project, and you're coming up in a global listing of genealogy blogs. And again, you could do Genealogy Ireland and narrow that down to just projects in Ireland. And then it looks really well, the layout is really well, and it's just very user friendly. And yeah, again, there's a free option. So any of the ones that I'm sharing here on the table, there's a free option. And so if you're starting out, or if your project is quite small, that's another reason to explore it. So that's Medium. And then on events, you'll all be familiar with Eventbrite, because that's the platform you would have used to register for today's webinar. But again, the advantage of using Eventbrite is that you are, being compared, or you're being showcased along other events, and it's very easy to search those by topic. So I've just said you'll see your event promoted amongst other events in your locations. So, if it's County Offaly or your heritage area. So again, we could use the example of genealogy or biodiversity. And it's suitable for online events. So it's not just for in-person. So depending on what approach you're taking this year, Eventbrite might be a good platform to use. And then newsletters. So newsletters it's quite a nice way to either showcase your project. So you might do a series of newsletters as the output of your project, or you might use a newsletter to share updates on your project. So if it's a festival or an event, a newsletter might complement that quite well. So again, if you use Mailchimp, the design is very professional looking, and it's easy to manage mailing lists. And from a GDPR aspect, that's important. It just allows people to opt out of your list, so that you're GDPR compliant. And then just to finish off, I have some images of examples of how you would use each of these. So the first one is Medium, and this is just a blog I found on genealogy. So very, very nice layout. This is a web page, so it scrolls down as opposed to being a photo in a column, but really easy to use. You just drop in your pictures wherever you'd like them, and then add in your text. So I'd recommend anyone that's looking at a blog to take a look at Medium. And then for Eventbrite, I just grabbed this event that the Georgian Society are organising, but you'll be familiar with Eventbrite from our own webinars. And again, really easy, just add your picture, add your event details, and then people can subscribe or buy tickets or register on Eventbrite. And then finally, the Mailchimp, and again, this would appear as one column, and you would scroll, but this is the Analyze newsletter, which is a Mailchimp setup. And again, it's just dropping images in, adding your text, and it's really easy to use. And you can manage the mailing list so that you're GDPR compliant. So that's everything from me on the communication, on the online and the social media. So I'll just stop sharing and I'll pass over to Susan.
Great. Thanks so much, Thelma. And before maybe we go to Mark, I suppose it's worth saying that people complain a lot about Twitter being, an angry place and people being complained about and so on. Ignore that, because when you're in a realm where something is really interesting and people are very passionate, as they are about heritage, as they are about the stories of the nation, you'll get a great welcome on Twitter if you join. And people will be generous, and they'll give you tips actually as they go along. And be generous in return, retweet their material. There's nothing worse than being the Twitter person who never tweets anyone else, but expects their material to be pushed out. So again, it's building by people retweeting and retweeting. And it doesn't matter if you only start and you have 50 or 100 followers. That's fine. It will grow and grow if you're working at it. It does take some time. There's no denying that. I think Thelma would agree with that. It does take some time in your day. But if you're efficient and organized, you can sort of set aside a little time, maybe in the morning, maybe just before lunch or just after lunch, and then again in the evening. So you have your kind of 3 slots in the day where you find something to say, even if it's only a small thing. That helps the continuity, it helps the regularity of it, and it encourages people to keep up with your story, whatever it is. So remember, be generous and the generosity will be returned to you. And photographs wherever you can. Even unlike Instagram, whereas Thelma said, the images need to be really powerful and really strong, because that's what drives it. The Twitter community is more tolerant of odd photographs and more tolerant of unusual photographs, or perhaps even ones that aren't terribly well framed. In fact, they're sometimes the best ones. So don't worry unduly, again, if that's not your great skill. Fortunately, we all have cameras on our phones, and that's a short way of providing yourself with a good photograph. So as we heard at the earlier seminar, don't worry if you're new to Twitter or new to Instagram. Have a go. What could happen? Well, you're not as frequent as you thought you might be, or you mightn't get as many retweets as you hope you might, but you keep going and it will build, particularly since you have a little bit of time now in July leading into August, where the hashtag for Heritage Week will be busy because there are so many events going to happen. And you're not going to get lost in the crowd necessarily. Just because there's more people using it doesn't mean you and your story will be lost. Use it as an opportunity to build, perhaps, and to get used to it for next year. It is a great way of getting stories out there. It's a great way of drawing attention to whatever you're trying to achieve. So don't let it bog you down too much, and don't get too upset about it if it's not working as well as you thought. It does take time. I mean, people like the Pope and presidents of the United States of America, they expect to be picking up thousands of followers every day. It's okay. We're not competing with them. We're definitely not competing with them. Thelma, someone has asked if we could see your Instagram and Facebook slides once again, if that's possible. It is, it's great to have all this in a space that's easy to get at. And I particularly like the piece about the blogs, because I wasn't aware of the Medium platform. So that's something I've learned today. But yes, are you able to show us those slides again?
Yeah, I'll flash those up again. And I'd also just want to, while I'm doing that then, is to say that the Heritage Week hashtag this year is Heritage Week 2021. So if you're doing something for Heritage Week, do include the hashtag. And yeah, also just what you said there, Susan, on using Twitter, everyone here is a heritage enthusiast. So it's even nice just to be there to see what other people are saying. And you'll find things that are that you want to retweet or to share with your own following. But yeah, just from an information point of view, it's nice to keep an eye on things. So here's the Facebook.
And as Alison said the last time, you might see something that another group is doing and think, oh, that's quite like ours, and maybe we could share something, or maybe they have some knowledge that we don't have, or vice versa. So it allows you to interact with a wider audience, as well as hoping to draw people's attention to your activity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just the Facebook slide there. So it's a great platform for building an online community and engaging local people. It is the most popular social media platform on the internet. And the piece about video there is very good. So video content is just taking over social media. And there seems the Facebook algorithm seems to have a preference for video content. And so just keep that in mind. And yeah, and if you're looking to create a community, give followers a reason to engage. So include a question in your posts, or, ask them, do they remember, when this picture was taken, or do they know what year it was, or what building it is, just to create that sense of community. And then for Instagram, we have, well, it's the fastest growing social media platform, and the majority of users are under 30. It's all about images and increasingly video as well. And it's a fast moving platform. So just, be aware of that. And your content is in competition with all the other content out there. So really make it stand out. And we'll just while we're here, we'll just do the Twitter one as well. So Twitter, the value is its brevity, so really short, snappy posts. I would say it's not ideal for hosting your project, but absolutely, if you think it is, use it. And then we have the 5 steps for building your audience or your community on Twitter. So identifying those heritage experts or key influencers, following them, really engaging with their content, sharing your own compelling content, and then using hashtags. And hashtags are really key on Twitter. So that's just something to keep in mind. And we'll share these slides after the webinar along with the link to the video. So if you felt like you've missed anything, you can revisit it then.
And I take it too that, Thelma, that you, during Heritage Week, you guys will have a team of retweeters, and so that when people are tagging you and naming, you will be retweeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be watching the Heritage Week hashtag, so Heritage Week 2021, and we'll also be responding if anyone wants to tag Heritage Week in their post. We love to see that. And I'm sure my colleague Lila would be delighted to like and reshare anything that grabs our attention.
Yeah, so that's really important to know, that if you do that and you're tagging the Heritage Council and Heritage Week and hashtagging as well, then there is something in return from you guys, because you of course have larger followings and you're then helping to spread their effort. Great. So Sarah says thank you very much for all of that. It's very helpful. And I think now maybe we'll hear from Mark. Mark O'Regan is the head of communications at the Heritage Council, and we're delighted to have you here, Mark, to share your advice and tips as to how people can use the media, the traditional media, shall we call it, to their own benefit.
That's great. Yeah, thanks very much, Susan. Thanks, Thelma. Can you all see that okay? Yeah, great. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. My name is Mark O'Regan, Head of Communications with the Heritage Council. So what I'm going to do is just, I suppose, set out some of the key points of how best to get publicity for your project and enhance the chances of the local media picking up on your work. So obviously, if you have any questions or queries at the end, feel free to ask them. So starting points, knowing your audience. So the first, and I suppose the most important thing in communications is to know your audience and know who you're trying to get through to. It really is, I suppose, the most important rule, just by way of trying to get coverage in your local newspaper, radio, or local website, knowing who you're trying to reach. And I suppose keeping this to the forefront of your mind when pitching to media outlets. And when you go about your pitches, I suppose, the great advantage is, that your audience is known. It's people within your county, your town, your village, it's your community. The other thing in your favor is that news desks want local news. It's really the lifeblood of what they do. So again, that is a big strength for you all, as your projects are, intrinsically of interest to news desks, because it's about the area and about the locality. So how to grab the interest of news desks, the line. So the first question I suppose a news editor asks a reporter when they're deciding whether to run a story is, what's the line? So essentially what they're asking there is, what's the strongest angle of the story? What is it about this story that makes it newsworthy? And the line in itself is what makes up the only opening paragraph in a story. When you open your newspaper, the very first paragraph, that is the line. And it's a sentence which news editors put on the news list for their news conference meetings with the editorial team. So it really is very important. If you're sending in a press release into a news desk, it's good to make the opening sentence really as strong as possible. Is there something unique about your project? Is there something quirky or unusual about it, which will give it the story an added dimension or an angle? News editors really like something that stands out and grabs the attention of readers. So something that jumps from the page, whether it's online or in print, it will definitely pique their interest and get published. So, whatever your project is, spend a bit of time thinking about the most interesting thing about it, something, thought-provoking or conversation-inducing about it. It could be something to do with the age of the project, for instance, an ancient doorway, perhaps dating back 100 years that has been restored. might be some link to a famous figure from Irish history. And I suppose because news editors are extremely busy and with various things competing for their attention, it's really worthwhile giving the headline and opening paragraph in your press release a lot of thought in getting it right from the outset. So writing a press release, just some general points, an overview. These are obviously just some additional points just to keep in mind when putting together your press release. As I've said already, the most important thing is definitely to identify and include the most interesting detail in the introductory paragraph. The following paragraphs can then amplify, I suppose, and expand on the points you made in the first paragraph. And then going on, you can then further explain what the project is about, the work that's been done, the plans for the future, any difficulties perhaps that you overcome. Another key point just to keep in mind is to keep the language in and of itself simple and very direct. So if you're using any technical specialist terms, just please ensure that you explain them so that not only readers understand, but also news editors understand what they are. And I suppose a good way just to approach it is to keep in mind that you're not writing for yourself, you're writing for the reader of the publication, i.e., again, the audience. So when it comes to a press release, your audience in this case is the general public, people who may not necessarily have any prior knowledge about the subject matter. So, explaining unusual terms is important. The other point to keep in mind, I suppose, is to keep your paragraphs short. Just make sure they're not too long, as this can make sentences quite clunky and hard to understand again. So the ideal and the objective is to make press releases as readable and as gettable as possible. So pithy and concise is always best. Something that's quite straightforward and you would think is obvious, but sometimes is overlooked, is to include contact names and numbers, preferably a mobile number at the bottom of the press release. So if the media outlet has any queries or points they need to clarify, they can use this number. And also this would be, typically the number for the person who is happy to be interviewed to out and discuss the project in more detail with the reporter if needs be. Another point just to keep in mind is not to send it in on spec. It's a good idea for you to phone up the news desk or the radio station beforehand, try and get a name for the person, most suited to send the press release into. In newspapers, it's the news editor. Radio stations, they have producers, obviously, who are involved in particular programs and who may be interested possibly in a feature type item on the program. And also a good thing to keep in mind is that after a bit of time has elapsed, and if there are new developments in relation to the project, send in a new press release, an updated press release to the news desk. Journalists, they're always looking for new angles, new lines, just to see how things have progressed. And then the other point is pictures. So as the saying goes, I suppose a picture is worth 1,000 words. So it's very important for newspapers and equally on websites, the images you provide are strong and are of good quality. Again, like as important as the angle of the story is, quality pictures just breathe life into text and provides, a visual to complement the words. And very, very often news editors, they ask about the line, but they want a strong picture to hold up a news page so that it gives balance to the page to avoid too much text, which visually is not very appealing to the eye. So, a bit like the wording, try and get an angle to the picture. Keep that in mind. Maybe something quirky. Quirkier the better. And something that's not too predictable, something that's different, which stands out from the crowd. That will definitely increase its chances of getting published. So just really avoid the predictable. I suppose somebody standing at a building, pointing at a building, that kind of thing. Just to avoid that. Something just that's a bit left of center is always better. And obviously it can be difficult, but it's definitely worth giving it some thought. The technical qualities as well, just another point on that, they should be, obviously as good as possible. If they're a bit grainy or fuzzy, again, less chance of them being used. Try and nail the quality of the photos is important as well. And if you happen to know someone, I'd suggest if you know someone who's, a photographic enthusiast, maybe ask them, get them on board, or someone locally with a high-end camera, perhaps. They might be able to conceptualize a good image, and you can kind of see what you both can come up with. Again, choice of images is important. So if you can send in, a variety of images to news desks, it gives them, they can go through each one and see which works best. The other point is in relation to captioning. It's important to caption photos correctly. It's definitely a big bugbear of news desks and picture desks if they receive photos in and they're not captioned correctly. So again, if there's something in the photo, it could be an object that dates back 100 years. If that's included in your photo, make sure you include the detail that this dates back to whatever period. It's not just any doorway or object dating back over the years. Make sure you include that detail, because more detail, news reporters, news desks, they want detail, and it's all about detail for stories. They want as much detail as possible. That adds to the news value. And also full names and types of people included in photos, just to include them. And I suppose just a key thing to keep in mind is don't be discouraged if your press release doesn't make the cut first time round and your project wasn't featured or whatever. Try again. It might have just been due to space constraints on a given day and was squeezed out at the last minute. News is coming in all the time to news desks, so something might have just been squeezed out at the last minute. So just send it in a week, 2 weeks later, or perhaps phone the news desk and ask them if they require something else from you. So different outlets. So there are different ways, obviously, to sell your message. Newspapers, covered the main points there. Local radio, the approach is the same just in terms of a press release, but again, very important to give a name and contact number at the end of the press release and send in the person who can be interviewed to discuss the work in more detail. When you're then preparing for the radio interview, the main thing is to be clear about, I suppose, about 5 or 6 key points in relation to your project. And I'd recommend that you jot these down, make a piece of paper in front of you, and use them as reference points throughout the conversation to steer the direction of the conversation. Radio interviews go much quicker than you might think. So, if you have these bullet points in front of you, you can just, get across the essential points you want to make. And I suppose when you're on air as well, it's good to keep it conversational, keep it relaxed, and deliver it, in a chatty manner. In relation to local websites, again, it's good to get a contact number, a name, an email address of the person who oversees the website. And I suppose, even so many of the projects of the National Heritage Week lend themselves perfectly to creating video footage, which again could be submitted to your local newspapers with an online presence. And smartphones, are of high quality. So it could be just a short 1-2 minute film offering snippets of your project, documenting the start, middle, and end of the project. And there's so much free software as well out there. There's no cost involved. It's all relatively straightforward. And YouTube is a great resource as well if you're looking just to get a starter's guide on smartphone video editing. There's plenty of free videos again on YouTube that can give you the tools you need. And if you do again know someone who has particular skills in smartphone video editing, it would be a good idea just to ask them help in this area. So social media then, the Heritage Council, as many of you will know, has a very active kind of presence on social media. These are our kind of key social media accounts, and social media in itself is a crucial tool for promoting your projects in the run up to National Heritage Week. And in the Heritage Council, we're really eager to help you spread the message about your work. As I was saying previously, short video posts, photographic montages, and they're really great ways to get the message out. And it really is endless, in terms of what you can be posting about. You can be constantly promoting your projects on a rolling basis. And we would really, encourage you to do that. Can't over-publicize your work. And, it's a great tool to generate interest and a bit of a following as well if you're constantly updating and providing material on your social media accounts. When you do post about your project, just please do ensure that you tag the Heritage Council and National Heritage Week social media accounts so that we're aware of your posts and we can then further amplify them, your voice, through our own channels. From the Heritage Council's perspective, we're working on having some material to push out during National Heritage Week. So we're hoping to have Sunday Miscellany on RT Radio, interviews, podcasts, and our HQ in Kilkenny will be turning green for the week, and we'll be pushing out videos and photos in relation to that. So I just asked you as well to keep an eye on our social media accounts and any stuff that we're pushing out during the week, you would mind promoting from your end. So it's very much we can amplify your voice, and just again, crucially, do tag us so that we are aware of your posts. And then just finally, in relation to hashtags, it's worth noting, I suppose, some of the key hashtags National Heritage Week 2021. And again, we just ask you to use these for as many of your posts as possible, so we can again just keep tabs on all your posts. So that's it. Thanks very much for your time, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Mark. I know there was some people observed there was a little bit of coming and going in the audio there, but I think nothing at all to do with you, Mark. I'm sure, but I think we were able to get most of it. And again, as Thelma said, any of the relevant slides will be made available to you after the event. So I suppose just in summary, think of again, like on social media, think of the quirky thing or the eye-catching thing for your headline. Make your release short enough. If you have 3 paragraphs, don't try to make it 6. If it's 3 and it's working, that's fine. It's better that it's something accessible and readable rather than just filling it with material to try to make it look longer. And the other thing you could do is talk to other organizations that you might know about where you are, and see if there's enough of you that could come together and maybe put in between you 4 or 5 press releases and persuade your local newspaper to run a special page together with all of you on it. If you know who the other people are. It's a bit different if you're new and you're doing something small, but if you're a little bit bigger and you have a little more experience, local newspapers, as Mark was saying, they are always interested in another way of doing things. And for them, sometimes having a page or 2 pages, it gives them the opportunity to be part of a big national event. And that makes them feel good as well. And it allows them then to do it at that local level, which for them will always sell newspapers because they're local photographs and they can follow up after the event if necessary, particularly if there's any in-person aspect to it, where they can add photographs of people doing things or attending things or sharing it with children and so on. So the main thing, like with social media, is to have a go. And even sometimes, although I know this is pinned to a particular week, local papers often run photographs particularly, or even press a week afterwards. I know this sounds a bit odd because you'd imagine that they'd want it in the week that it was, but sometimes they are, as Mark said, overrun with other things and they hold things. It doesn't matter. Any publicity is always welcome, and it always, talks, if it's talking about you and your group and what you're doing, then that's always a good thing. So the 2 things can work well together, social media and traditional media. You're using more or less the same material. You're often using a quote from the same person or people. So try to think of it as something where you're not adding a job, you're squeezing more out of the job that you did. And certainly people do still read their local newspapers. They are still listening in many places a lot to their local radio stations, and they love to hear local people talking about local matters. So step forward and give it a go. And as Mark said, I think, trying not to do it on spec, getting to know someone, pick up the phone and say, who's the best person to give this to? Could I have a word with them? And then immediately you've created a human bond. And it's a lot harder for them to say no to someone they know than to someone they don't, that just represents yet another email that's come in through the many emails they get. So I think that there's a lot there. I think the key thing is to enjoy it. It's part of the job of organizing something, is to tell other people about it. And getting to know your community, your wider community on social media and in traditional media is a great way of benefiting what you do yourself. Meeting new people, people stepping forward because they've seen it and going, oh, I know about that, or I have a letter, or I have a photograph. That's how that works when you're out there in the community. So I don't see any questions. Maybe let me just check if anybody has any questions. This is the time to shout. Or otherwise we no, I'm entirely wrong. There's a question. My Tidy Towns group is thinking of doing a tour to one of our local sites. We'd like to bring a small group. When should we start advertising a tour like this? So
yeah, I can take that, Susan. I suppose it depends on the capacity, because it's quite a small group, and it'll be, of course, within the public health guidelines and everything at the time. You probably are okay doing it maybe 2 weeks before, and it really depends on numbers. Or if you were looking at, making a bigger splash, you might do smaller groups. So, and then maybe your lead-in time might be 3 or 4 weeks. So depending on the capacity of the tour, you would extend the advertising date or the timeline. So if you're just doing a small one, I think 2 weeks in the lead up.
Yeah, and if you found you had masses of people, interested in going, you might be able, depending on how much capacity you have, to organize 2 trips. One over each weekend, or one on Saturday and one on Sunday. If you found that you literally had 50 people where you only thought you were going to have 10. So that will depend, but you can start on social media, because you can put a photograph up of the place or the bus or whatever you want, and start the narrative about, well, we're going to be going to this place, and do you want to come with us? And it would be lovely if we had your company, and maybe you have a story to tell. You can keep going with it 2 or 3 times in the first week, and then build it up a little bit more. That's how people become attracted. You're telling a story about what's going to happen at the event. You're building up the behind the scenes. You're giving people a little ringside seat into what you're at in order to create this event. And people like that, and it makes them more interested in attending. I know certainly I organized an event once, albeit on the top of a mountain, and I thought we might have 30 or 40 people, and we were swamped entirely. We had about 300 people. But fortunately, there were no COVID restrictions, but people just kept coming and coming and coming. So, it's a nice place to be, but it can cause its own headaches. So just think about, do you have the capacity to do another one if you see the interest rising?
Yeah, and just on that, Susan, that, something small like that wouldn't be an event or a tour that you would put on Eventbrite. There's probably more modest platforms that you could use to share that, and it's probably going to be social media, or you might have a mailing list for your Tidy Towns group.
Absolutely. Someone is asking, how often over maybe a 6-week period would you submit a second or even a third press release? So Mark, maybe that might be for you in terms of your local station, or it depends, I suppose, on the pickup you've had for the first one, if any.
Yeah, it really would depend. Yeah, exactly, Susan. Yeah, it just really depends on the pickup and whether you got some coverage. But I suppose with the press releases, just the key thing is obviously the local angle and the audience, and then follow-ups is really something to keep in mind, because, as I say, these are obviously the projects you're working on. There's a start, there's a middle, and an end. So I'd approach it in that way with your press releases. So if you do get a bit of coverage from the outset, maybe you can again update your press release towards the middle, and you know, as well, update the photos that you supplied, you know, with the kind of this is where we're at now type of thing. Like that kind of stuff is something that news reporters want, and there's huge local interest. So it really does depend on the initial pickup. But look, I think as well that the point to keep in mind is to touch base with the news desk. As Susan says there, you know, develop that personal touch, and that does change the dynamic. So if you can build up a bit of a relationship with your local media, and that does improve the chances significantly of getting some coverage. But yeah, you can't overdo it in terms of press release. But just, you know, touch base. Perhaps you could drop them an email. You could phone after a week or two having sent it in, and you haven't, you know, no coverage. Just touch base, and you know, really depends on the case by case. But yeah, start, middle, and end. Just approach it in that way, and updates with fresh photos, and you know, as I say, the dynamic photos as well, if possible.
And also to make sure nothing is more irritating for a news editor or a journalist to be given a phone number to call someone and the person doesn't pick up. And then they just go, well, I'm not bothering with them again. And they actually won't. So make sure that whoever you are nominating as your spokesperson will answer their phone, will not say, I've run out of credit, or I left it at home, or it was out of battery. All of those things happen in life, it's fine. But it is the one thing that's guaranteed to make your relationship get off to a bad start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and even on that as well, just I agree with you completely. And then in relation to the press release itself, goes back to the point of it needs to be instantly gettable, and it needs to jump straight away. There's not going to be any effort on the part of the news editor really to read, you know, right till the end, because they have so many press releases, so many competing demands, and you know, so it just needs to jump off the page straight away. So it comes to do with, you know, the press release plus the photos, both equally are important. So just approach them.
There's a question here. If we wanted to create a heritage app for our area, anybody got any suggestions? Well, certainly I know it's a bit of a step into a deep end, an app. It does require a lot of work, depending on the complexity of it. But Thelma, maybe you might like to.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of any examples, but I know that there were some apps organised last year. So let me take a look back, and we can include that in just the FAQs that we'll send out afterwards. There were some apps, and you know, it's a good way, if you're looking at that, of one of our approaches or themes this year is that intergenerational link. And you know, if there's a young person that's out there in your community that would be willing to work on that with you, that would be a really nice way of bringing in that other generation into your project. Absolutely.
So I think we've reached the end of our questions and the end of our webinar. I hope that all of you that have taken part across the 3 events have found it useful. Certainly I have, in terms of learning things. And remembering at all times, enjoy it, share your passion, and find new ways to connect with people, particularly this year with inclusivity as your top line. And some of that can be done via social media, via traditional media, talking to your friends, finding other groups and organizations that share a similar purpose with you, and of course not forgetting the great heritage officers that are attached to all the local authorities across the country, and the great team at Heritage Week and the Heritage Council. So thanks again to all of you for attending, for being involved, and for asking really useful questions, and I wish you all the very best for Heritage Week, which I believe, in fairness to that one question there, is largely online this year. There'll be some small in-person events, but it is yet again, it's going to be a challenge, and we're going to enjoy finding new ways to share new stories in that way. So thanks a million, guys.
Thank you, Susan.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.